remarks. We'd like to acknowledge a few more people, not because we just want to bore you, but it's important to let you know who's in the room, so that when we are doing the hosting, you will show me where they are. So when I mentioned that, I think I've seen Mr. Patrick Nomo, Chief Director, Ministry of Finance. That's thank you. Mr. Frank Debrah, ex-CEO of Car Bank. What is the company from? Oh, is it what I said? Okay, sir. Yes. GRA, I think Assistant Commissioner or something. Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner. For it, Deputy Commissioner. Don't reduce the amount to pay. Commissioner, you prove it. I've seen Fish Asiabo, Fish. Oh, Mr. Ismail Johnson, to chair 2009 and 2013, is a lecturer in public policy, public financial management, taxation at the University of Business School. He's also a consultant and member and lecturer in Africa and a few other things. As chairman, he was the national body in 1993 and 1979, deputy commissioner of the VAT service. Before joining the IMF, taxi national pioneer years at the National Secretariat, now very brief number 86, and is an already Ministry of Finance. He has worked in consultants in Harvard, Georgetown, to practitioners and ladies and gentlemen, please help us to receive the author remarks. Mr. Seth, please.
To get a copy. Even if you are not a tax practitioner, but just for sheer curiosity and little knowledge in VAT administration, I think it will be helpful for us to get one. So I was saying, but once I have the opportunity, you are supposed to make a brief comment. So I'm trying to be very brief. Coming from the private sector, collection of taxes are good. We need it. Without it, we can't build a nation. Sometimes I find a little bit of a challenge with the mode of which some of your operatives handle the private sector people. Anytime there is a forum and you bring business people together, they seem to have an issue. I see LC upper here from GRA. I'm using this occasion to encourage you to possibly let your PR department increase the level of education, because if people are made aware as to why they have to pay their taxes, I'm sure they will gladly love to pay. So on this note, I pray my voice will be heard so that you do something about it, so that the private sector practitioners will see you as their friends, not necessarily as people who come to harass them. On that note, I congratulate Honorable Seth once again for taking the lead, and we promise him that we'll definitely grab copies and also acquire the same knowledge. I must admit that the video I just watched was so impressive. It reminded me of things that were done under his tenure, all within 3 minutes. Once again, congratulations.
Thank you.
Focus, some of you would have heard me say this. We should focus on the fraud taxes, which are the biggest fraud taxes. And it's not just the VAT we should stop distorting, but those four. The first one is the income tax. When you're an employee, you pay income taxes. Many of us know it's a PAYE. And then you also, for self-employed persons, you pay the self-employed at the same scale as the employees, and then we have the corporate income tax. So this constitutes the first major pillar of the tax system. It serves a purpose. Some income is exempted because they consider to be social justice, because they earn low. And then the rates are calculated 5, 10, the way up. So the opposite of income, obviously when you earn income, you spend. So the expenditure tax with the broadest base is the VAT. And the VAT, like income tax, in principle you have to pay anytime you spend. But then there are exceptions, exclusions, textbooks, and logistics, the rest. Now, if we distort these two taxes, which are supposed to be neutral, unless the law says that foodstuffs, especially those produced in Ghana, should not be taxed, everybody pays when they spend. These are the two paramount pillars of the tax system, complemented by excise, which we call sin taxes. If you smoke, if you drink, if you drive, and you pollute, yes, we do have taxes on pollution. They pay the excise, tobacco. The fourth one is the import duty, which is discriminatory. So if I drink this bottle of water as I did a short moment ago, and it's produced in Ghana, it's not imported, so I don't pay import duty. If on the other hand, the water is imported, we pay import duty. So it drives a wedge between domestic production and imports. And that's why we say it's a protective tax. It's protecting local industries. They are designed to have this. Today they remain very popular than the US efforts to make sure that Americans consume locally. And if you are exporting anything to the US, they are also called tariffs. So the Trump tariffs are equivalent of customs or import duty. These are the four pillars. So when we begin to introduce levies, we are mimicking one of these four taxes. And we distort one of these four taxes. And this is why, despite 20 or so, as my boss, President Mahama, counted during the campaign, and I also time 1, 2, 3, all the way to 23. Any one of those 23 is just a mirror image of the four. And therefore, there must be a purpose for imposing levies. And we have had two levies since the ERP SAP era, from the Temperatures, which we have often used, the temporary import duty and the fiscal stabilization levy, the bankers here will know, or the national stabilization levy. And the West stabilization tells us its purpose. Anytime we have had an IMF program, we introduce these two taxes to complement the expenditure cuts so that we don't do too much expenditure cuts. But their feature was such that every time we went out of the IMF program, usually after 3 years, they lapse. Until another IMF program, then we reintroduce it. The tax that started distortion was not mentioned actually, is the communication service tax. And my boss will recall that was the first levy which was not part of the VAT. He mentioned VAT, he mentioned NHI. It was a communication service tax that was imposed as a separate levy. Of course, it was also, assigned. So if you like, that increased the VAT rate to 20% of 17.5, at the time. The difference is that if you're a business, you were not allowed to claim a credit or a refund for that tax, which is the difference with the VAT. Then we tolerated it. The irony is that with the 20 or so taxes that we have introduced, the highest point of the revenue to GDP ratio, the tax to GDP ratio, remained 2015. You can check it, GRE. Until 2022-2023, when it increased from slightly above 15%. It means that for all its distortion, levy, everything, they never really boosted, the tax because they distorted the tax regime and they made it very difficult to implement. So as we review not just the VAT, but the entire tax system, including ITAS for the 20 year, I think what we need to rethink as a nation is to remove as many distortions that merely, mimic the 4 core taxes, so that we allow GRA to implement them effectively and efficiently, and we allow businessmen to be able, to also comply, because it's business that collects most of the taxes, even though it is employees. Small businesses, yes, we have a presumptive tax. And one of the things we did to replace the flat rate and all those other things was during the 2013 review, was to say, let the small businesses pay what we call the presumptive tax. A percentage of salary, of sales, or whatever, and let it represent their obligation to pay both income tax and VAT. Hopefully we can go back. This was also changed. Because that's the equity end of it. Because there are small businesses who earn higher income than teachers, nurses, and many of us here. These are small businesses in quote. So if they pay the presumptive tax because they cannot keep records, fair enough, that should be sufficient. So a simplified tax regime is what we need, and I would hope that with the beginning of the reform of the VAT, we would allow the VAT to remain simple as we gradually eliminate as many of the levies. They haven't done as much good. They have only distorted the system. I must, take an opportunity to thank Agyeman and his the last 2 bosses of PricewaterhouseCoopers. I think Fish has already been mentioned. He was the first person I tried to brainstorm about, writing this book, and he said go for it. And then I had, I often have, breakfast with my very good friend from Italy, who he should place, and I spoke to him, and he said, you just keep going. He would have been here, it is in the US at this time. So PwC in particular has had quite an input. Of course, I couldn't acknowledge them fully because of ethical and other things, but I owe you, quite a lot, for the review, for people who read every page, not just chapter, every page, of the book. I learned a lot. He wasn't passive. He's a tax partner, so he challenged my thinking on a lot of issues, and I said it doesn't matter. There are some silent GRA friends, and the initial ones with Nia, who is a retired GRA, and some parents. So, Mr. Commissioner General, thank you very much for some of your silent, friends and contemporary employees, who also reviewed, various sections, As for Patrick, the compliments has been paid already. When it comes to gifts, this was one of the brains behind, gifts. And I read a report which he prepared when he was in the Ministry of Health, and that is how they ended up bringing him to the Ministry of Finance, because it was exactly what we wanted to do, with gifts. So hopefully one day the expenditure story, will call his year-based